Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, a podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199 Agency, a marketing agency working in sustainable commodities. And with me is my co-host.
Hi, it's Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates.
And in this episode, we're delighted to welcome a very special guest, Gary Lewis, President of NEODA, the National Edible Oils Distributors Association, and Sales Director at KTC Edibles. And we're going to be talking to Gary, continuing the theme of this series, about some of the upcoming deforestation and sustainability legislation, specifically EUDR and UKDD.
So Gary, hi, and thanks for joining us. We want to kick off with the EUDR, but there is something else coming that nobody seems to be talking about, which is the UK legislation. But to kick off with the EU, what do you actually think of the new legislation that's coming?
Oh, good morning. Well, I'm actually very supportive of this legislation. However, obviously, there's lots of questions that come from it. I think we feel pretty comfortable in terms of the palm oil sustainability element. However, when you expand that to other commodities, particularly things like soybeans, then it becomes a little bit more challenging.
And you as a business, I mean, obviously involved with NEODA, but you as a business are quite big into soya oil. So what do you see the impact on soya with the EU?
It's quite considerable because soybeans are obviously a valuable commodity in terms of processing for meal, for feed. And obviously in soya oil, which is a byproduct, is used extensively in the UK in the food service industry. And if you would make it more sustainable, there are costs involved with making that sustainable. It is possible. However, once you change the costing, the availability and the price sensitivity of soya oil becomes less relevant. So people will look to switch to safer commodities. Yeah,
and that is a growing concern. I mean, obviously, Ukraine continues to be a problem. The poor harvest that we look like we might get through the amount of flooding that we've had, particularly within the UK. One of the things that's really focusing my mind is that I think a lot of the traders and processors are probably ready for the EU due diligence. But what about other people in the supply chain? It's still quite vague what other people are going to have to do, isn't it?
It's very vague. And I think at the moment, if you look at the questionnaires coming into us as an industry and us as a KTC, they're very much focused on, are you aware as a supplier of EUDR? And what are you going to do to help us in terms of meeting those requirements? So I think the onus has been pushed onto the supplier or the manufacturer or the traders, rather than understanding themselves what their role in the process is, because clearly everybody has their role, and I don't think it's actually clearly understood what their role is. And as you said earlier on, they're focusing more on the EUDR, and they should be focusing on the UKDR, which is all going to come in at some point in the next year.
Yeah. I know Barnaby and I have chatted about that. I mean, you've taken some, calls from people who don't seem to be aware of the UKDR. Do you think that's true? And
yeah, I mean, even when we were at the RSPO meeting, if 30% of that room doesn't know what's going on with the regulations, then what chance does your average kind of industry player have?
It's true. And obviously, I think people are unaware, said whose role? So obviously, is the crusher, importer, who's the primary role? People like ourselves who are converting that into a pack format. But they as well, obviously, if they look at the UK regulations, they've got to be either over 50 million turnover or more than 500 tonnes per commodity. And a lot of the people will either come in either in turnover-wise, they meet that criteria, or in terms of commodity-wise, they meet that criteria. I just don't think they're ready and prepared for it, because everybody's sort of saying we will meet those obligations when it becomes law in terms of the suppliers.
And there's still just not the clarity there either in the EU or in the UK, is there? We're still waiting for the key information about what needs to be reported, about how it needs to be reported. And
obviously the mechanism for processing that information. And I think obviously the last meeting we attended in London, I think there's confusion also from maybe DEFRA, because DEFRA is saying actually, we do not see any sort of price impact in terms of doing that, which is quite the opposite. By going down this route, you are putting price pressure into the system. Because if you want sustainable commodities, particularly those commodities that haven't been under the same scrutiny as palm oil has been for the last 40 years, then the cost will be involved. And then if you start to get people saying, well, actually, the easiest way for me to bypass these legislation is to move to another commodity. Now, if you think about Ukraine very clearly illustrated, if you take one major commodity out, which is sunflower oil, and replace it with another, as the rapeseed oil, it has an impact because literally, very quickly, those supplies become very, very tight to get hold of, and the prices reach record levels. So if we're looking in terms of soybean oil replacement with rapeseed or sunflower, pretty quickly, if you're taking soya out of the mix, everybody will quickly buy rape. And all of a sudden, we'll have an issue in terms of availability for rapeseed for those core rapeseed customers.
Yeah. I mean, KTC has worked really hard to get a segregated, an RSPO segregated supply chain. Do you think there's going to be a pinch on SG material? As again, that gives you a great deal of traceability. So that's the first question. Do you think there's going to be a pinch on SG? But what will be the impact on mass balance? Do you think more people will go for mass balance?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we made a decision consciously, not because we thought that EUDR was coming in, because there was no sign about EUDR. We thought it was the right thing to do. And the cost implications of moving palm oil from mass balance to segregated were relatively small, and we worked with our customers to move over. However, if in terms of our bakery business, then some of the fractions involved, which is palm stearine, the premium to move from mass balance to segregated is quite significant. And as you move towards the ST supply chain, you're quite right, all of a sudden now we're seeing that implication because availability in Europe at the moment is starting to tighten up. And if you add in the issue to do with MOSH/MOA regulations, which tightens up capacity as well, we're having a situation where, one, we're seeing prices rise, and one, we're seeing refiners being sold out many months ahead because everybody's now trying to realign their supply systems.
Yeah. And it's also, do you think the legislation will get delayed from an EU perspective?
I think this is the difficult one because...
Not a difficult question.
The difficult thing is, obviously, we're all working towards the target, which is obviously by the end of the year to try and move our supply chains, working with our suppliers. But it's very clear there's a misalignment between what public officials are saying in terms of the implementation will happen on the 1st of January. There's the reality in terms of, are the systems ready? Is everybody ready to put into the system? And I think the crunch point will be, will we get a situation where we are clearly not ready for the system? We get towards December. Do we have a situation where people won't put products on the market from the 1st of January purely because of the risk of either fines or sort of because that? So I think, unfortunately, it will be delayed based on the conversations I've had with some people. However, I don't think it'd be significant. But if my only criticism of the EUDR is that if the time should be longer, we've had obviously a long time to do that, but only the testing happened earlier this year. And to do the testing 6 or 7 months into when it became law seems quite late. And to have quite a broad range of commodities, and particularly some of those other commodities which are much harder in terms of traceability than soybean oil, it makes the whole situation very, very difficult going forward. And I think that's what's causing the panic. If I was just to reference a point now, we talked about soybeans earlier on. Already, nobody is offering any soya products from January 2025 as a result of this EUDR. Mm-hmm. So already we have a situation where if consumers want to cover forward for the right reasons, they're not able to buy. So as I said earlier on, the reality is if they can't buy soya beans or soya meal or soya oil, they'll have to switch to another commodity.
Do you think the UK will find itself in a strong position because it obviously sits outside of the EU and the legislation is still to come into force? It's only for commodities and it is just looking at illegal and it is a due diligence statement that is once a year. There's a lot more information to follow. The big thing for this is that it's everything. Yeah. It isn't just at a certain level, or the commodity codes that are mentioned in Annex 6, which is part of the EU. Do you think people will think, oh, the UK market is a better market to enter and come and do more business here? So, I don't know, make a bakery fat here, because actually bakery fats would not be included in the EU due diligence as I see it.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think the issue we have with some of the larger corporations is that they don't just operate within the UK. And obviously, and ourselves, we also have acquired a business in Ireland, and we'll be supplying products from into Ireland or exporting around the world. That becomes difficult. And as you said earlier on, the onus on the manufacturers seems to be looking to comply with EUDR and not UKDR. The UKDR seems more pragmatic than the EU side. So we've got to try and balance it out. And what they're telling us is, although you have to comply with EUDR first, and we want you to comply UKDR later. So that makes our life very difficult. And particularly, I would say, some of the surprises I've had with talking to some of the customers, actually some of the confusion is more in the EU. I think in the UK, because we're already pretty much well advanced in terms of segregated palm, talking to some of our Irish customers, they are still taking conventional or taking mass balance. So there's quite a dramatic move from segregated, from conventional or mass balance. So there's a lot of cost coming around, a lot of confusion in terms of that. And I said, this is in the EU market and not our own UK. So it's becoming quite difficult.
I guess for operators like yourself, though, working across both, there is a double jeopardy, though, really, because you've got the legislation, although the EUDR is seen as potentially more onerous, more in-depth, there's more to it. Actually, there's elements of UKDD in terms of, especially in palm, which are going to be, they're going to be more stringent on some of the fractions. So you could end up having the worst of both worlds in some cases.
You can, if you think about it, though. I think the UK is a net importer, and the UK is relevant to those based in the UK, those operators, the refiners, and the process in the UK. However, KTC imports its soya oil and its palm oil from continental refiners. So by default, they're having to comply with EUDR, and that's coming in. So we have to buy from those people because there just isn't enough capacity in the UK. So by default, we're importing from the continent into the UK and then into Ireland, into our other businesses. And that's where I think the complexity. I think smaller businesses will obviously have a freer choice because they're able to buy from the UK processors. Obviously, there's a lot of discussions whether we'll do a trade deal with Malaysia as part of bigger trade deals, and they can bypass the European market, and that make life easier. But in terms of the retailers and the large manufacturers, they want to cover all bases.
Yeah. And then from a NEODA point of view, I mean, NEODA is quite a unique group made up of traders and some manufacturers, but also, representing the fast food market, if you like, through the fish and chip shop market. And beef drippings in there. So how do you think NEODA members are getting organised? Well,
I think talking in our last meeting, there's a couple of implications in terms of commodities like beef dripping, which is a staple, frying oil for the fish and chip industry in the Scotland, Ireland and parts of the UK. They're already coming under pressure because new environmental pressures in the EU are forcing farmers to cull cattle. In Ireland, they're culling 200,000 cattle to meet certain commitments and environment, obviously, because of emissions, shall we say. So already they're starting to see pressure. So what we'll see as these commodities, which were once a staple, start to become premium commodities because the availability of the cattle isn't there. And obviously, I think there's confusion. If you look at the EUDR, it's not being based on the butter being produced from the cows, but the feed going into the cows. So it seems strange. So people are going, why is he giving one and giving it away with the other? It just doesn't seem practical. But in terms of the food industry, obviously the food service industry is just getting back on its feet after lockdown, getting back to kind of normal. Restaurants are running at pretty good levels now. using a lot of variety of oils. And obviously we're seeing the impact of inflation over the last couple of years, and inflation's coming down. But the reality is a lot of the issues going forward under these new regulations mean that inflationary pressures could hit the market again and impact across Europe, including the UK, because we're paying more for our commodities, because obviously we want to make sure it's sourced from the right area. But that still doesn't help people who are trying to earn a living and eat out, or even eat staple foods, really.
Yeah, I mean, definitely from a UK perspective, everything is going to be under the scope of the new regulation. So that is going to be animal feed. Yeah. And we were speaking with Rob Dakin and talking about the dairy herds. And of course, you will be obliged to understand what is within their feed. And so that immediately hits, obviously milk production, cheese production. And again, that's the complexity. We wait to see how detailed this legislation is going to be. But that, again, will add cost because nobody knows what's in animal feed. And, it switches all the time because of
change
price.
week to week.
Yeah.
And
it's every staples. It's not about going like restaurants. It's making bread. It's making obviously staple foods that we eat every day, buying from supermarkets. Again, what we might see as a bizarre situation where obviously inflation becomes out of control because of these impacts. Nothing to do with crops, and crops are impacted by weather and supply and demand. But this takes it to a whole new level.
I mean, obviously, industry understands quite well, I think, how interconnected the different commodities are compared to potentially the legislators, especially. Is that right?
No, I think no, because I think so. Obviously, from our meeting we had, I'm trying to be putting a different side to this because I think they're looking at in the black and white system. If we change all the input, we make sure everything complies with law, but in terms of the missing element is what drives prices in Europe. Mm-hmm. And then if we go back to basics, commodities are driven by biodiesel production. So we're going to have an issue in the next couple of years where we have a choice. Let's say because of the impact of EUDR and UKDR, people move away from soy oil, so they move to rape. But we also have a massively growing biodiesel industry, particularly for rapeseed oil. And what we're seeing, because of palm oil will be taken out of the mix of biodiesel in the next few years, we're seeing it drop dramatically. That's being replaced by rapeseed oil. So we already have this dilemma where we want an increase in renewable energy, but we want a decrease in terms of forest risk commodities. And at some point it doesn't mix. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I'm trying to highlight to everybody is that we're saying to people, if you take palm oil out of the biodiesel, even if it's a segregated palm out of biodiesel or energy, then you're going to have to plant significantly more rapeseed. Mm-hmm. That isn't possible because the yields are totally different. Obviously, palm oil produce at least 10 times more than rapeseed and soybeans, so you're going to have to plant more land. And the reality is, we are, as the EU and UK, we're importing rapeseed from Australia, from Ukraine, from other worlds, just to meet demand. A lot of it is to stick into a car for biodiesel, which is maybe the right thing to do. But the crunch will come, like we saw in Ukraine, within the next couple of years, that we will have a food versus fuel argument because we will run out of rapeseed, or we'll run out of sunflower. And obviously, although sunflowers return to normal, pretty much that really, obviously there are still tensions going on between Russia and Ukraine, and that could change quite dramatically. So we could be back to square one. So I think the industry is aware of the practical side, but they don't see the hidden side, which is the balance between renewable energy and food.
Yeah, and that's a big concern, really, as conflict, with Israel, etc., and the Red Sea. So, regardless, that's causing shipping issues, delays, extra cost, and then obviously growing population in different parts of the world. Do you think that when the EU actually started to think about this, and the UK, do you think they actually thought about the way that people would switch out of one commodity into another? I
don't think so, honestly.
Yeah.
I thought, to be honest, we learned our lessons from the Ukraine crisis, where it did become very difficult. And obviously the geopolitical element has changed. Obviously ships are now going through the Red Sea because they're going around the long way around. And as you can imagine, some of the producers who are supporting lots of communities over in Indonesia, Malaysia and Papua New Guinea that basically Europe is restricting the right to the market. And the harsh realities of, we do need to feed a global, rising global population. And that is very much in terms of China and India. And what will happen is those supplies will just bypass the EU, and they obviously, other people don't have the same standards, and India and China don't have the same requirements as we will. So I think what you will create is a two-tier system. You'll have an EU system, which is a premium, very sustainable, fullest risk, and you'll have the rest of the market, which is rapidly growing and more focused on price rather than these sort of elements.
So the iron law of unintended consequences are that this could have a net negative impact on things like deforestation and the environment.
I think so, because I think the biggest criticism that we've been working on, as you know, is that in terms of palm oil, for example, does it do anything to help the smallholders? Is everybody aware of the impact that smallholders don't have the technology, don't have the infrastructure to comply with these regulations? So in a way, is it cutting out those people, to support them? Again, the consequence, I don't think they realise. They just think, oh, well, from the 1st of January, everybody will comply because it's law. That's very correct. But as we start to rapidly increase these commodities, there will come a crunch. As we stand at the moment, we're starting to see EU capacity tighten. And tighten means there is nothing available. So unless you're covered, and you're going to have to look out much further to cover, and a lot of small businesses aren't able to contract beyond 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and hedge themselves. So that's the reality. And as I say, talking to industry people, and I mentioned earlier on, are we going to get a situation where we get to a point and say there are certain commodities that won't be available on the market?
So, it paints quite a negative picture, I guess, in terms of, if I'm going to summarise, that the potential is that consumers and businesses pay more and the legislation has no impact on its core.
Yeah, that's naive. I think, but if you think about the work that we've all been doing on palm oil, the UK has got itself, I think, to a very good position by educating, working with people, moving over segregated, and we're pretty much there in that, really. I think in terms of when you expand it to other commodities, particularly soya and I'm sure cocoa and everything else, the work hasn't been done. So all the work we've done on palm has spent, some of us has been 14 years educating, working with 14 years, and standing there and saying to the regulators or talking to DEFRA, if you think we can do in less than a year, we can get everybody over. I think that's a bit naive, to be honest. However, we are anything to do with sustainable commodity, it's got to be practical. It's got to fit within this. There's got to be an approach where you move the way. Now, the supply chain will move, again, if you move to a premium, but as long as everybody realises, the retailers, everybody else, that you will be paying higher prices for it.
The good intentions aren't enough. It's got to be practical is one of the messages, I guess, that's come out of this. Yeah.
And I think, so what we tried to do, we've tried to educate our customers in terms of, we're working with the regulators. We're part of all those, the meetings to see what's going on. The next phase is to come back in the next couple of months. However, if you think about it, it's already the end of April. Then soon we'll find out about May. When is the implication? Obviously, we've only got 6 or 7 months ready for implementation of the EU. I just can't see anybody in the UK, let's talk about UK specific, anyone is ready. They're obviously putting pressure on us to be ready for that. That's fine. And things like palm oil, I think we'll get there. But as Judith was mentioning earlier on, it'll just make SG more available. So that premium that was maybe not there a while ago will get greater. Yeah. Because you're moving the supply chain from mass balance to say, they'll go to mass balance. And yes, you can do the traceability exercise. But if you want to meet EU things, you're going to have to prove it.
Yeah. Mm. Do you think that, just changing tack slightly, that the new legislation, the fact that it's going to be, on the BBC and all the different other media channels, that people, the average consumer is going to start realising that palm oil isn't as bad? Maybe that story that I think the three of us have been in the industry long enough to know that if you mention palm oil, people leave the room, or don't want to speak to you. But do you think that the consumer might start to change their mind when they realise that, forestry's commodities is just not just about palm oil?
I think, to be honest, that's the biggest issue, to be honest, because it's taken many of us years to re-educate people after misinformation coming in the industry. And we've just got there. And I think when we start to see the impact of higher prices, then obviously consumers will kick back. Just as a side note, the BBC is very interested at the moment to talk about olive oil. Today's focus is, why is olive oil at a certain price? And again, that's purely to do with crop size. And you get the first questions you get are, is that because of Brexit, or no, it's just crops, much smaller crops. And in the next couple of years, when we see that the EU and the UK will stand us and say we've got some of the highest ethics in terms of forest risk. However, all of our basic commodities and foodstuffs will be much higher, then consumers will become reality. And we can see that in the organic industry. What we've seen in the last couple of years, the organic sales are dropping, vegan sales are dropping purely because of the cost. It's just a practical reality. And if you are, and obviously there are many people who can afford to have to ask for vegetarian, vegan and ethical standards, but the vast majority of people are still struggling with other factors, financial factors in the industry at the moment. So I think the worst is yet to come. I think the consumer's not ready for this because they're not aware. The industry is, and the industry is obviously in the background working very hard to make sure we all comply. But I'm a little bit sceptical that I think longer term, if we do it practically, it will work its way through. I just think we're in for a difficult year ahead, particularly if the EU tries to push ahead on the 1st of January when it's not ready. I think it'll be a bit embarrassing, to be honest.
So, thinking kind of more positively, what are the things that we can do? How can we make it work?
I think a phased approach. I think the commodity scope is, as we said, things like with palm oil, we can very quickly say we can move towards this SG route. The UK is over 80% already segregated. Yeah. So we're well on that route. I think then we can use as exercises to prove that we can trace back to where it's produced. I think in terms of the commodities where we clearly see there's an issue, I think there needs to be a phased approach. So we get those other commodities phased longer term. So we do palm first, then we move into palm. And as we all know, it takes some time to get those kind of ready. And I'm sure the industry will get it ready, but we shouldn't rush, because rushing will be an issue really on that front.
Yeah.
So it's mainly an issue of timescales.
Yeah.
The intention's good.
Intention's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I said no one is going to fault anybody in terms of sourcing for the right areas. Again, we need to see the list of countries that are prohibited. So that obviously will give us some kind of scope. But the practical reality is that we know where the areas are where there's problems. And I think also people need to be aware that this isn't the end of it. The EU and the UK will expand those list of commodities in the coming years to include other like sugar and other things. Yeah. So this is the start and not the end. Mm-hmm. And I think, and we're starting to see lots of issues in terms of UK government trying to not interfere in terms of telling people what they should do and shouldn't do. And you look at the farmer process we're seeing across the EU at the moment, they're primarily to do with, obviously, the new regulations, environmental regulations, but you've got to get the public with you. You've got to take the public with you. Farmers need to know that they have to be supported and not being taken out of business. And I just think it just feels that we need to think about the end consumer first and the reality of the economic situation.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So I think we probably draw it to a close. It's like really always fascinating talking to you, and appreciate you being with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening to the latest edition of the Sustainable Commodities podcast. And we'll see you next time when we'll be talking more about sustainable commodities and the upcoming regulations.